On July 19, 2016, the mid-range GPU market was revolutionized with the release of the Nvidia Geforce GTX 1060, offering performance that beat the previous generation high-end offering, the GTX 980, while also having more video memory and significantly improved efficiency. The GTX 1060 changed the definition of mid-range performance, and all at the $300 price point. Now that we're nearing 3 years on from release, the GTX 1060 is still as popular as ever. But with the release of the much more recent touring cards as well as price cuts on the RX 580, the GTX 1060 has been losing market share to newer or alternative cards from Nvidia's greatest rival, AMD. So if you're looking to get great 1080p performance in 2019, is the GTX 1060 still the go-to card? And is it worth buying in 2019? Okay, so the flavor that we'll be testing today comes from EVGA, and has a single fan and a 6-pin PCIe power connector. This 1060 is a fully featured 6GB model, which is based on the GP106 chip, which is fully unlocked in this variant of the card. Featuring 1280 CUDA cores clocked at 1506 MHz, the GTX 1060 offers 4.37 teraflops performance, which is 104% ahead of the step-down, budget-friendly card, the GTX 1050 Ti. Other than the CUDA core count and the clock speed, the core configuration of this GPU is relatively standard when it comes to 1080p capable cards. With 80 TMUs and 48 ROPs, the 1060 has almost all the features and on-paper specs to be able to game at 1080p. Plus, with 6GB of GDDR5 on a 192-bit bus, this GPU has a rather large amount of memory for its target resolution, meaning that there is some flexibility when it comes to texture and AA settings. When looking at the peripherals of the 1060, the 6-pin PCIe power connector along with the 120W TDP means that most somewhat up-to-date systems will comfortably accommodate this card. With all the specs and general information out of the way, let's check out how the 1060 performs. The system we'll be using to benchmark the 1060 is a suitable mid-range setup, featuring an i3 8350K overclocked to 4.5 GHz with 32GB of DDR4. This shouldn't bottleneck the 1060, and during our tests, CPU usage never got above 90%. To store our games, we're using a 2TB Barracuda HDD and a Timetech 480GB SSD to store our ROS and other general purpose files. So now that we know the setup, let's get into some performance figures. The first test we ran on our 1060 was the Ashes of the Singularity GPU bench, and at 1080p with 4x MSAA, this card crushed the benchmark and returned an average of 67 frames per second. While the FPS may not be as high as the newer RTX 2060 or even GTX 1660 Ti, these performance figures are still great for a card at this price point, and shows that Pascal is still up to the task when considering a gaming workload. Up next, we ran the Universe Sandbox 2 Earth and Sphere of Moon simulation, and at 1080p with 2x MSAA, the GTX 1060 ran the test with an average of 156 frames per second. While this test definitely stresses our GPU, it also puts heavy strain on the CPU. This lets us see how well this graphics card can work with the CPU, and based on the results of this test, it passed with flying colors. So with our synthetic tests out of the way, let's get into some performance figures. The first game that we tested using our GTX 1060 was GTA 5, and when running the built-in benchmark at 1080p ultra settings, this card returned an average of 63 frames per second. While this game is now 5 years old, it still looks rather good when considering its age, but performance-wise, GTA 5 just seems to love Pascal-based GPUs. Not only does the 1060 run this game well, but even the much less powerful 1050 Ti and even the 1050 can run this game at a decent frame rate and decent settings. Even so, the performance offered by the 1060 is rather impressive, and it's still a blast to play on this mid-range card. Up next is Battlefield 5, and at 1080p ultra settings, the GTX 1060 was able to achieve an average of 70 FPS. For being such a recent game, as well as being optimized primarily for touring, Battlefield 5 runs well and looks phenomenal. While the 1060 doesn't support DXRT features, the lighting in this game looks great, but if you are looking to get into Battlefield 5 with ray tracing features enabled, then you'd be better off getting something like an RTX 2060. While it does kind of suck that there aren't any advanced lighting features, the game still looks great, and it plays even better on the 1060. The third game in our test suite is PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, and at high settings in 1080p, our GTX 1060 returned an average of 97 frames per second. While there does seem to be some headroom, I found that raising certain settings causes some significant FPS variance. But even at high settings, PUBG is a visual treat, and it looks gorgeous at times. But if you're looking to max out PUBG, then going with the 1660 Ti or even a 1070 would give you a great experience and actually would give you the experience that you're looking for. But I found the 1060 to be a perfect card to have great visuals and performance in the ever so popular PUBG. Up next in our test lineup is the new big game, Apex Legends, and at 1080p high settings, our GTX 1060 returned a very playable average of 97 FPS. When looking at general performance figures, this game runs nearly identically to 2016's Titanfall 2, and when considering the graphical fidelity and engines of both games, this makes a ton of sense. Apex Legends also includes a very interesting feature that was in Titanfall 2, and that's the adaptive resolution. If you're okay with sacrificing some visual clarity in order to boost overall graphical fidelity, then maxing the game out and turning on the adaptive resolution feature will give you a locked 60 FPS. But if you want a more consistent and locked resolution, then the game is still very playable at 1080p, and it's hard to pass up the 1060 if you're looking to get into Apex Legends. Following up Apex Legends is another very strong performer. For Honor is another visually appealing title, and at 1080p ultra settings, our 1060 ran the game at an average of 118 frames per second. While maxing this game out is downright gorgeous, it remains beyond playable even at these extreme settings. Other cheaper cards such as the 1050 Ti struggle a bit when maxing this game out. While it's completely understandable that those class of cards wouldn't be able to compete, it also highlights how much performance you can get from the 1060 for a price that's not too much more. While For Honor is a great game, it looks excellent and plays well, and it's really fun to experience on not only this card, but all Pascal cards. Moving on from For Honor, the next game we're testing is Black Ops 4's Blackout mode, and at 1080p high settings, the GTX 1060 returned an average of 61 FPS. At these settings, you're getting a much improved experience over the consoles, and while there are some occasional dips below 60 FPS, they aren't really noticeable and the game picks up the slack rather quickly. During a match, this game looks great and its visual art style is rather appealing and holds up on a variety of hardware. But on the 1060, Black Ops 4 is a blast to play, and it's always fun to look at. If you're looking to get into Blackout or generally Black Ops 4, then going with the 1060 is a great option. The last game we're testing is the ever so popular Fortnite, and at high settings in 1080p, the GTX 1060 gave us a buttery smooth average of 104 frames per second. While Fortnite has never really been known as a demanding game, it can be rather taxing on hardware when you turn up the settings or resolution. If you're looking to max this game out, then you easily have enough headroom to be able to play at 1080p completely maxed out at 60 FPS. If Fortnite is your thing and you're looking to either switch to PC or upgrade from an older card, then the GTX 1060 is a phenomenal choice, especially when considering how well it runs Fortnite. So now that we've taken a look on how the 1060 performs, let's discuss if purchasing this card in 2019 is worth it. When looking at its performance class, the AMD RX 580 provides an almost identical experience at a cheaper price. So if you're trying to decide between going with a 1060 or an RX 580, then just go with whichever card is cheaper. But if you're weighing this card against newer Nvidia offerings, then going with the GTX 1660 Ti or even the much more expensive RTX 2060 would be a better choice when considering the future. While the 1660 Ti is around $70 more than the GTX 1060 new, it offers performance that's identical to the GTX 1070. While it may be hard to stretch a budget that far, the 1660 Ti is a more modern and better performing card. But if you're looking for a 1060, then checking out the used market is a great place to look. I know it's been done to death, but buying used really isn't as risky as a lot of us think. Buying a new 1060 isn't the greatest choice as there are cheaper and equally as powerful cards available from AMD. But if you're looking for a fantastic used card, then you can't go wrong with picking up a 1060. It's a great card in 2019, and its specs will help keep the card relevant for years to come. But at its current price, it's a bit too expensive when considering its competition and successors. If you're looking to pick up a 1060, then it's a great card, and I can't recommend it enough. It delivers solid 1080p performance at a price that won't break the bank or overly stress your PSU. It's honestly a sweet spot for gaming in 2019, and it's a great choice if you're looking to get into some gaming. So thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and click the bell icon so you'll be notified about all our future uploads. And tell us, what do you think about the GTX 1060? Do you have one or have you heard good about them? I personally love my 1060 and I can't recommend it enough, but tell us, what do you think? I can't wait to see what you have to say, and I hope you have a fantastic day. So thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.